Let's set the scene. The year is 1789, and France is, well, quite literally burning. The French Revolution has completely torn apart one of the globe's most powerful monarchies. You've got King Louis XVI sitting on a crumbling throne, and the streets of Paris are chaotic. I mean, they are running with anger, blood, and this incredibly dangerous new idea that ordinary men deserve to hold power. And right into the middle of this absolute chaos, history introduces one of its most extraordinary characters. Not a king, not a nobleman, but a man who would eventually crown himself emperor.
So this brings us to a massive historical puzzle for this explainer. How exactly did a mocked outsider conquer Europe? Seriously, how do we get from the bloody revolutionary streets of Paris to a guy making the crowned heads of Europe actually tremble? Well, to understand that, we have to leave the French mainland altogether. We need to look at his unlikely birthplace, a small rocky island in the Mediterranean called Corsica.
Part 1. The Outsider from Corsica.
Born on the newly acquired French territory of Corsica in 1769, Napoleon grew up speaking Italian. He didn't even consider himself French at first. He felt like a complete outsider in his own country. And you know that outsider status really followed him. When his family secured him a scholarship to a French military academy at age 9, he was constantly mocked by his wealthy, aristocratic peers. They made fun of his accent, his minor nobility origins, the whole shebang. So, how did he respond? He just outworked them all. He ignored the laughter, bent over his military maps, and absolutely excelled in mathematics and artillery strategy. His teachers even noted he would go far, assuming circumstances allowed.
Moving on to Part 2, from general to emperor.
Now, for most military officers, the French Revolution was pure chaos, but with aristocratic commanders fleeing the country or, losing their heads to the guillotine, ranks suddenly opened up for anyone with actual merit. This was a massive opportunity. At just 24 years old, young Napoleon leads this brilliant artillery assault at the Siege of Toulon, successfully driving out British and Spanish forces. Then come his stunning Italian campaigns. He's consistently defeating the Austrian Empire through sheer speed and incredibly aggressive strategy. Fast forward to 1799. France is totally politically exhausted, and Napoleon seizes the moment. He stages a coup, becoming First Consul at age 30. And then, the climax of this ridiculously rapid ascent, 1804, he is officially crowned emperor.
And we have to talk about the sheer audacity of his 1804 coronation at Notre Dame Cathedral, because it sent one very clear message. He bowed to no one. During the grand ceremony, he famously takes the crown directly from the hands of Pope Pius VII, and he places it on his own head. I mean, the message to the world was completely unmistakable. He was the ultimate authority.
But here's the thing. His impact wasn't just on the battlefield. He completely rewrote legal systems. He created a system of civil law known as the Napoleonic Code. And this wasn't just some temporary reform. He built modern roads, schools, institutions, and his civil law foundation actually endures to this day. It literally still forms the legal basis for France, Belgium, Quebec, and even Louisiana. He wasn't just winning wars. He was actively reshaping the very fabric of society.
Part 3. The Russian Catastrophe.
Every rapid rise has a tipping point, right? And in 1812, catastrophic hubris really began to crack his invincible empire. 600,000 men. Let that number sink in for a second. This was the staggering scale of his invasion force into Russia. It was the largest army ever assembled in European history up to that point. Napoleon marched these men into Russia fully expecting a quick campaign, a decisive battle, and an immediate Russian submission.
Well, he got absolutely none of that. Moscow burns and winter arrives. The Russian strategy was brutally effective. They simply refused to fight a decisive battle. They retreated and they burned their own land behind them so the French would have nothing to eat and nothing to use. It's wild. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, the Russians had set it on fire themselves. So he waits for a peace offer that never comes, and then the devastating -30-degree winter sets in.
Which leads us to a real gut-punch reality. Less than 100,000 men survived that catastrophic retreat. Men literally froze in their sleep, horses died by the thousands. The overwhelming majority of that massive record-breaking army was just wiped out. Napoleon had survived every battle, but he couldn't survive Russia. And this catastrophe permanently shattered his aura of invincibility.
Part 4. Exile and Waterloo. So with his massive army destroyed, his enemies across Europe smelled blood. Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Britain all march on France,
leading to his abdication in April 1814 and his exile to the tiny Mediterranean island of Elba. Now, most men would have just accepted defeat there, but not Napoleon. In February 1815, he escapes with just 1,000 soldiers. He marches north on Paris, and incredibly, you really can't make this up, the enemy regiments sent to stop him end up joining him instead. He rebuilds his army, kicking off the infamous 100 days. The entire world completely held its breath.
And it all culminated right here, June 18th, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. This was his final, desperate stand in Belgium, against the combined British forces under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian forces under Field Marshal Blücher. The battle raged all day long. Napoleon actually came dangerously close to winning, but as the sun set and Prussian reinforcements arrived, the French army finally broke. It was officially over.
This time, there was absolutely no escaping. He was exiled to Saint Helena, a remote South Atlantic island 1,200 miles from the nearest land. He spent his final 6 years completely isolated. Forced to abdicate for a second time by the British, he spent his remaining days writing his memoirs and dictating his version of history until his death in 1821 at the age of 51.
Part 5. A complex legacy.
So as we wrap up this explainer, we have to impartially evaluate his historical footprint, because it is massive. 2 centuries later, he's the second most written about human in history. But how do we view him? On one hand, was he a visionary liberator, a champion of meritocracy whose civil reforms created institutions we still use today? He argued to the very end that he brought order to a continent drowning in aristocratic privilege. Or, on the other hand, was he an absolute tyrant, an autocrat who seized power, crowned himself emperor, and waged relentless wars resulting in the deaths of 5 million people? He was profoundly contradictory, simultaneously a modern reformer and a warmonger responsible for unimaginable bloodshed.
Napoleon himself once said, "Impossible is a word found only in the dictionary of fools." It's a powerful thought, and it really forces us to ask ourselves, how much of modern history was shaped simply because one mocked, out-of-place kid from Corsica completely refused to believe in the impossible? The world he built is quite literally still the one we walk in today. So what other impossible histories are out there waiting for you to uncover?